continuing with our top headlines, Big Sis admits that the U.S. does not face a terror threat from Iran or Hezbollah, despite all the hype drummed up by the establishment media about a scary Iranian or Hezbollah attack on soft targets in the United States. The Department of Homeland Security has admitted that there is no specific threat facing the country. DHS boss Janet Dungbeetle Napolitano was obliged to admit that no such threat exists. She said, however, that there is a threat that bears watching. Meanwhile, CNN and the establishment media have enthusiastically hyped Israel's terror narrative by running reports and stories speculating an attack on Jewish targets inside the United States. The medical establishment is firing patients who refuse big pharma, big government vaccines. This is an article posted in the Wall Street Journal where they mention a study of Connecticut pediatricians published last year says that some 30% or 133 doctors said that they had asked a family to leave their practice for vaccine refusal. Can you imagine? And a recent survey of 909 Midwestern pediatricians found that 21% reported discharging families for the same reason. Well, now two can play at that game. If your doctor or pediatrician wants to inject you and your children with toxic chemicals, then you fire them and find yourself another doctor. I suggest that you can learn more about the dangers of vaccines. Go to vactruth.com, do the research yourself. I'm sure you'll make the right decision. Now, before we start talking about false flag terrorism, I want to take you to a piece that was put together by our very own John Bound. He's a very talented writer and producer here at Infowars.com, and he's going to educate us on the Hegelian Dialectic. And he's focusing on the psychology behind government-sponsored terrorism.
The global banking cartel has used one tried-and-true process to create wars, rob us of our currency, and eat away at our substance. This process of control over the masses is called the Hegelian Dialectic. So what is it, and how is it being used today? German philosopher George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel devised a dialectic, or method to resolve a disagreement between outcomes. The dialectic is made up of three attributes: thesis, an idea or opinion; antithesis, the opposite idea or opinion; and synthesis, the alchemic process to bring together a wanted change. It is commonly referred to as order out of chaos, and is waged against the masses in many forms. Saul Alinsky, self-avowed Marxist, proponent of the Hegelian dialectic, published this in Rules for Radicals. Any revolutionary change must be preceded by a passive, affirmative, non-challenging attitude toward change among the mass of our people. They must feel so frustrated, so defeated, so lost, so futureless in the prevailing system that they're willing to let go of the past and chance the future. George Bush became the hero of 9/11 simply due to the fact that he was the president, and then rammed through legislation that threatened our liberties as we all complacently stood by and allowed it to happen. A manufactured crisis occurs, thesis. George Bush answers it by rallying public opinion and becoming the host of the tragedy, antithesis, thus owning the crisis through synthesis. Equilibrium is attained. All of the once separate parts of the plan are joined together. In this example, the Patriot Act acting as the equilibrium on the desired road to tyrannical fascism in America.
They're too good at what they're doing. They create the crisis on record. They sell the fraud. Then they say, give us more power. Give up your sovereignty, Europe, America, and we'll fix it. But then it only implodes faster. They make bigger bonuses, but they're destroying their own golden goose. They're hacking it open greedily. When it's giving them a golden egg every morning, they think there's eggs inside. I think the point you made of because they're on record creating this to consolidate power. They've bragged about it. Those memos have been made public by Goldman Sachs and others, but they're going to fry things so badly the bankers are all running to private islands with their own security teams. I mean, like they want to rule everything so much and have just so many digits in their bank accounts that they're going to devalue the value of the digits through their sheer greed.
That is a possibility. And if you look at the Hegelian Dialectic, if that crisis at the beginning spins out of control, they lose the tail end of the dialectic, don't they? There will be no synthesis at the end. They'll be lucky if they survive.
Another method to manipulate the masses is the use of two opposing views to attain the desired view. Politician A espouses the first view. Politician B counters with the differing view. A clear example of this was the debate over the unconstitutional NDAA bill of 2012.
I strongly believe that the United States government should not have the ability to lock away its citizens for years and perhaps decades without charging them and providing a heightened level of due process. We don't pick up citizens, we don't incarcerate them for 10 or 15 or 20 years or until hostilities end, and no one knows when they will end, without giving them due process of law.
The great concern that we have now in terms of the security of the homeland is from so-called homegrown terrorists, radicalized Americans. So these people, in my opinion, have taken sides. They've joined the enemy. And to have this body at this time, as the threat of homegrown terrorism rises, say no, they can't be treated as enemy combatants, is not only doesn't make sense, and is totally unresponsive to the facts that I've just described.
President Obama threatened to veto the bill as long as it contained the section concerning due process, and then quickly changed his mind before the final version was voted through Congress. Obama then told the media that the version he had signed was revised to eliminate any threat to freedom of American citizens, even though this was not true, and the bill gives extraordinary powers to detain American citizens without a trial. The media synthesized Obama's lie by claiming that Obama will not use the powers he now has. The desired result is synthesized by mainstream media as they turn a blind eye to the debate. The American people cave into the lie because the process it is attached to seems so familiar. John Bound, Infowars Nightly News.
And that brings us to our next segment. There are literally hundreds of examples throughout history of government-sponsored terrorism, known as false flag operations. And chances are that the United States and Israel plan on orchestrating such an event to be blamed on Iran as a pretext for war. It is a fact that virtually every single war since the Spanish-American War of 1898 has included the use of a false flag operation as an excuse to enter into conflict. But unfortunately, the lies have been covered after the fact, too late to prevent mass death and destruction. In 1953, the CIA and British intelligence staged terror attacks to overthrow the democratically elected leader of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh. Mossadegh had nationalized Iran's oil fields and denied British petroleum a monopoly. U.S. and British intelligence operatives launched a successful coup d'etat and overthrew the Iranian government, replacing the regime with a ruthless dictatorship while seizing control of Iran's oil supply. 1964. U.S. warships were apparently attacked by North Vietnamese PT boats, an incident that kicked off the U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. The attack was a staged event that never actually took place. What followed was an excuse by President Lyndon Johnson to dramatically expand the scale of the Vietnam War, ultimately at the cost of 3 or 4 million dead Vietnamese and 58,000 Americans. June 8, 1967, the USS Liberty, an American naval vessel sailing off the coast of Gaza, was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of Israel. The well-coordinated attack, which lasted for hours, resulted in the deaths of 34 crewmen, 170 injured, and catastrophic damage to the ship. one of the most highly decorated vessels in U.S. history. Egypt was to be blamed for the attack, to serve as a pretext to drag the U.S. and her allies into war in the Middle East. If not for the heroic efforts of the ship's captain and his brave crew, the Liberty would have faced almost certain destruction. The truth about Israel's attack and subsequent White House cover-up continues to be officially concealed from the American people to this day. Now, in recent weeks, we have seen a massive buildup in the Persian Gulf by both the United States and Britain. Meanwhile, U.S. and Israeli intelligence sources are officially warning of domestic terror attacks inside the U.S. and Israel. And if a conflict is to ignite in the Persian Gulf, it is highly likely that the U.S. or Israel will use a false flag operation to kick things off. And that brings us to our quote of the day. Ask yourself, would a government that has lied us into 2 wars and is working to lie us into an attack on Iran shrink from staging terrorist attacks in order to remove opposition to its agenda? And that was by Paul Craig Roberts, the former Secretary to the Treasury in the Reagan administration, also known as the father of Reaganomics and a frequent guest on our show. I actually think he was referring to the Bush administration when he made that statement, but I'm sure Craig Roberts wouldn't put it past the Obama administration to carry out a false flag terror attack as well. But, you know, I mean, they're both run by the same offshore banking cartels and the military-industrial complex. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. Now, that does it for the first half of our show. We're going to go to break, but when we come back, I'm going to interview author Matthew Stein. He's the author of When Disaster Strikes, a comprehensive guide for emergency planning and crisis survival. We're going to discuss the unthinkable, surviving a nuclear disaster. So stick with us. This is information I'm sure you're going to want to see. It could very well one day save your life and the lives of your loved ones. Matt Stein, when we return, right after this.
We were brought up loving our country and our Constitution. That in the United States of America, we were free. And that's an attitude that we've tried to instill in our children. I met my wife while in the Air Force. I was a combat pilot in Vietnam. I served in Desert Storm as a commander. When I graduated from the academy, I took the oath of office. And as a commander, I administered that oath to many people. Now I wonder about the understanding people have of our Constitution, and I think about our candidates for President of the United States. It's interesting to see the support Ron Paul gets from the military. And if we think back to the code of conduct and people raising their right hand that they were going to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, why would those same people support in great numbers Ron Paul? I think it's because they know that he supports the Constitution of the United States. It doesn't mean you have to go to war to do it. It means you have to understand what the Constitution is and be a supporter inside of your own country, whether you're in the military or not, of that Constitution, and make the United States strong. And Ron Paul does that. That's his feeling, that's his thrust. And that's why if you look at the percentages that support him in the military, it's huge. Why is that? Because they've raised their right hands and they're putting their lives on the line for us here in the United States. And they know that Ron Paul does the same.
He hyped Israel's terror narrative by running reports and stories speculating an attack on Jewish targets inside the United States. The medical establishment is firing patients who refuse big pharma, big government vaccines. This is an article posted in the Wall Street Journal where they mention a study of Connecticut pediatricians published last year says that some 30% or 133 doctors said that they had asked a family to, despite all the hype drummed up by the establishment media about a scary Iranian or Hezbollah attack on soft targets in the United States. The Department of Homeland Security has admitted that there is no specific threat facing the country. DHS boss Janet Dung Beetle Napolitano was obliged to admit that no such threat exists. She said, however, that there is a threat that bears watching. Meanwhile, CNN and the establishment media have enthusiastically.com. Do the research yourself. I'm sure you'll make the right decision. Now, before we start talking about false flag terrorism, I want to take you to a piece that was put together by our very own John Bound. He's a very talented writer and producer here at Infowars.com, and he's going to educate us on the Hegelian Dialectic, and he's focusing on the psychology behind government-sponsored terrorism.
The global
Believed their practice for vaccine refusal. Can you imagine? And a recent survey of 909 Midwestern pediatricians found that 21% reported discharging families for the same reason. Well, now two can play at that game. If your doctor or pediatrician wants to inject you and your children with toxic chemicals, then you fire them and find yourself another doctor. I suggest that you can learn more about the dangers of vaccines. Go to VacTruth. Continuing with our top headlines, Big Sis admits that the U.S. does not face a terror threat from Iran or Hezbollah.